Yo, goons, what's good? Today we're going to be discussing why 2XKO is not doomed and kind of just giving a broad summary and my thoughts on the overall situation at Riot right now with respect to 2XKO and kind of some wider context of what's going on there. Please, in the background, enjoy me getting unk-checked and dropping combos to lose points in the +3, -10 hellscape. So what actually happened? If you're not aware, Riot's dev team for 2XKO downsized by about 80 to 90 people from a team that was maybe in the range of like 180 to 190 people, maybe less than that. We don't really know the exact numbers, but it's probably remaining around a size of 80 to 90 now after the layoffs. And I just want to make it clear, like, no matter how you spin it, right? That's a terrible thing. Many of these people very likely had little to do with the, let's say, misalignment between Riot's expectations and what was actually likely to happen. And they just got caught in the crossfire. And that's regrettable. I mean, Riot is a company with profits in excess of, many, many millions to billions of dollars. I think that it is an absolute travesty and stain on the industry that one of the most reputable development studios does this to its employees that they hire for a project, especially in many cases without warning. That's unacceptable to me, and I'm calling for wider change in the industry. That's ridiculous, but that's beating a dead horse at this point. And I will acknowledge that they're supporting some of their employees through this transition. But again, this is not acceptable. This is a company that is so massively large that you should do better in this case. Now, what actually happened? Well, evidently, Riot probably had a target number for this game, some range in which they would consider, like, this is the failed case, this is the successful case, this is the excessive case, so to speak, when it comes to downloads and monetization. And clearly, that just didn't happen. So the game was axed, so to speak, when it comes to this developer layoff, only 2 weeks into its full launch. And in those 2 weeks, it was already the number 3 most downloaded game on PSN, which means it was doing reasonably well on console. Quite well, in fact. It's only behind titans like Fortnite, just to add context to that. And additionally, there was a tournament, Frosty Faustings, that generated enormous positive PR for the game in Frosty. In fact, this message could not have come at a worse time, because hype for the game was at an all-time high at this point. Pretty much everyone in the FGC was taking a second look at the game and evaluating it as something that is pretty special and unique and that has a future, especially when you consider the positive upward trend that the game has had from that tournament all the way back to, say, EVO France, or those cluster of First Impact events, where pretty much all you saw was team abuse at that time. And that was awful for viewership, undoubtedly. Now, nonetheless, just the reality of the way things work at these companies, yes, you have target numbers, you have budgets, and you have monetization goals. Now, there's a conversation to be had, certainly, about the misalignment between the upper brass's view of what this game would and should be, and probably what the people who were developing it envisioned. And I think that anyone who knows the first thing about fighting games would say that your lower bound of success for a game like 2XKO should be a successful fighting game. Because, we're not going to necessarily expect that when we create a fighting game, it categorically transcends the whole genre of fighting games. Like, it's just entirely revolutionary and bridges to the mainstream, and we're hitting League and Valorant numbers. To me, and to any dev, I think, not even necessarily in the space, that's just far too optimistic. And in fact, we do have a successful fighting game. So we're kind of at the lower bound of success, pretty much in the most greedy but reasonable case possible. So again, I think these layoffs are slightly unjustified. I want to talk about the exact numbers. So we're going down to a team of maybe 90 or so. And it's very important for me to spread the understanding that this is not like a skeleton crew that is no longer capable of sustaining the team's goals at that point. Absolutely not. Just for context, for example, ArcSys, the whole company, has a couple hundred people at most, 200 to 250 people. And they simultaneously were working on Exerd, Strive, Granblue, and you also had some other projects there. Previous updates, DBFZ, live service, etc., DNF Duel. Street Fighter at its peak had reportedly around 300 people. Tekken, maybe a little bit more than that, but those games required new engines, and to be fair, Riot was also built from the ground up. Moreover, I just want to say that the remaining team at Riot is probably not the same as a generic team. So That is to say that Riot really is, and part of why the game has seen the success that it has and continues to be on an upward trend. They are real major, like quadruple A leaders in the industry. They understand how to synthesize data. They are live service experts. And moreover, particularly when it comes to balance, they have what I consider to be a much more pragmatic approach than many of the Eastern studios. And so while I think it's regrettable and shameful even that this downsizing happened so early into the game, to me, because games have budgets, because they have target numbers, and this is the reality of the world, I would rather have a team that is sustainably funded for the foreseeable future than sort of risk and gamble on an oversized team that is going to run out of money and then Riot genuinely pulls the plug. We're not getting the plug pulled here. We're just getting a major downsizing. And in some ways, I also think that can have an upside on the development cycle. For example, we've heard some conflicting messages from Riot over this game, and in particular that they want to sort of realign it with what their original goals were, maybe hit combos and such. But more recently, after the layoffs, we got an article from the team lead of 2XKO Unconquerable that pretty much explicitly stated that their goal now is to focus on building a game that the FGC loves. Instead of trying to bridge this nonsensical gap between the mainstream and fighting games, instead of trying to simplify the game to make it more accessible to new players, they're instead focusing on rewarding the core player base. And I think that is a good move by them. And it's easier to justify when you have a smaller team. You can't exactly go for the massive, ambitious project that this game once was if you have half the size. And I just want to say these are simply silver linings. I'm not agreeing with the layoffs by any means. I'm sort of just saying that they were practically foreseeable and understandable. And they may have even had sort of like a plan A and plan B sort of system. Plan A being, okay, if this game actually is massive, it's going to have this size team and have this much support. If it's not, it's going to have this size team and this size support. And I believe that we're in the plan B phase now. But there really were some legitimate issues with the development of this game. And I unfortunately think that this contributes to the upper management's perception of the team. In some ways, launch was probably their last chance with the senior management, I imagine. And some of that, to be completely honest, I think is understandable. We're not talking about one game that was in development. We're talking about like 3 different games, effectively. So, firstly, you had sort of a Rising Thunder but League version, and that went on for several years when initially the Cannon Brothers were brought into Riot. Then you had a hard reset to a 2v2 tag, and this was like a complete reset. They didn't just change the way the gameplay went. They also changed the art style, they changed the core system mechanics, pretty much everything went. In a way, even, again, like an engine pretty much had to be built. It was completely different. And that was around 2021. And then even furthermore into that, you had major system mechanic overhauls within that period. So if you remember in Alpha Lab 1, for example, there was no teching. There were all kinds of different systems in the game than there are today as well. And things just functioned very differently. Champions were very different as well. And the result of that is that we saw by the time the game launched, we had like 10 or 11 characters. And to be honest with you, for a 2v2 fighting game that had 10 years to develop, even if it really was more like, 3 or 4 years, that is not enough, especially if you really want to make a splash on the mainstream. If your appeal to the League audience is that there are League of Legends champions in this game, and you launch with a tiny percentage of the overall roster, like 5% of the League roster, that's a problem. And in particular, when you choose characters that, while I understand from a fighting game perspective, might capture diversity and design across the board, if you want to actually hit your core audience, yeah, the game should have launched with Akali, it should have launched with Samira, it should have launched with Riven, it should have launched with Set, Lee Sin, perhaps. It's just a little bit ridiculous that we had Illaoi and Braum and Teemo and Blitzcrank in the game, and even Warwick. And I'm not even necessarily saying that their gameplay design is bad in all cases, but these were just bad choices if you want the game to grow. They honestly were bad development choices, and I respect the freedom and artistic choices taken by the team, but you have to think practically at that point. And it wouldn't be so exacerbated if it weren't the case that this game was already so deep into development, and I guarantee, going by what happened here, was on thin ice with the higher-ups, one way or another. And then you had some flubs after launch. I do have to highlight this. I'm sorry, Teemo was an absolute failure of a champion. He destroyed viewership and interest in the game in the FGC, and of course that's going to transcend the game itself as well. If everyone playing it is negative and is having sort of the same opinions that the game is not functional in a sort of way. But their sins aside, I really just think that the game still has a very positive future, because what we have that's unique in 2XKO is an extreme dedication to improving the game and doing so in a way that isn't sort of opaque, like sometimes it is in the case of Arxis. For example, when I played Strive, they would just make new seasons and not really give a good reason as to why they're doing something. They would just kind of say that they are doing it in many cases, and also it was unwarranted. Like, why was Wild Assault added to the game exactly? Why was Potemkin given armor and then reverted to keep his Karas but also keep the armor? They're just very inconsistent on that. You don't really see that with Riot. It's much more well thought out. It's much more well tested. We have very, very competent, experienced fighting game players on the development and balance teams, and that is a critical part of why the game continues to improve. We're also still getting our 5 champions this year, and we're also getting a competitive series that is contractually locked with these tournaments. Riot cannot pull the plug on that. So at least for the foreseeable year or so, the game's development is, from a player perspective, probably going to be mostly unaffected. I also wanted to quickly mention Legends of Runeterra as a precedent for what can happen in these cases with Riot. If you'll recall, Riot did an update some time ago, I think a couple of years ago. This was in early January 2024. They had mentioned that a number of projects across Riot are getting the axe. They did a massive set of layoffs, I think 500 roles globally, which was around 11% of their workforce at the time. And so what happened here is that Riot Forge essentially got shut down. And additionally, Legends of Runeterra famously was considered to be killed at this point. They repeatedly cut the team size at Runeterra. It was not hitting the numbers they want. They were subsidizing its costs with other games, and they recognized that as unsustainable. But nonetheless, Runeterra actually, even to this day, continues to get updates from a small team, and it continues to get content added, though honestly the competitive PvP meta is like completely dead, and it has been for a long time. It's unfortunate, but the game isn't completely dead, and so I doubt that that's going to be a risk with 2XKO, especially with the size of the team that we're keeping and the messaging that we're being told. Now that said, I have some legitimate concerns about the team being downsized. So first of all, when it comes to testing, with the loss of champ designers, probably QA staff as well, I think that, in the absolute sort of best case scenario, the amount of time the team spends testing and balancing is like halved. It could maybe not be that impacted depending on the distribution of sort of the roles that were laid off, but I consider those ones probably much more likely to have been the targets than like systems engineers or back-end developers and things of this sort. So I am concerned about that. I'm also concerned that we're kind of basically sitting in a mirage period of support for the game. They've reasserted multiple times that 5 champions are coming in 2026, and they're also reasserting that the competitive series is staying the same in 2026. But my concern is that most likely a number of these champions were like 80% done before they were actually, announced that we're getting 5 champs. I don't even think they would have done that in the first place if they didn't have extreme confidence it would come out in any scenario. So my concern is like, if 2027 gets 2 champions or 3 champions, then we start to enter a death spiral where the less support you get, the fewer players play, then you get more cuts from Riot, and the loop just repeats until the game dies completely. And I am very, very much scared about that. So the best thing that we can do as a player base is continue to show support for the game, and especially generate positive PR for it, when the game is honestly really fun right now, and we just had multiple great tournaments to watch in a short span of time. And each patch, the game definitely continues to get better. These are things that we really want to push as a core audience of this game. And also, the frame perfect idea is really great from Riot. It's like a self-funding mechanism where as long as we, the player base, have interest in the game, and of course they keep adding skins, which if they're making money, they're going to do, then our tournaments will be funded. Even if our competitive series is much less supported going forward, years from now, we still are going to be able to support our own player base as long as we engage in these. But the game is good, and I really, really want to end off by discouraging this whole "the game is doomed" sentiment. You're going to create the feedback loop that kills the game. If you do that, you're going to generate less interest, which leads to less purchases, which leads to less support, and it loops. Okay, if you enjoy the game and you can sort of look past these grievous errors that Riot made in their evaluation of what the game would be on launch, then what we really, really should focus on is enjoying it and giving our feedback to the active game and getting excited for tournaments and entering it instead of just spreading this doom and gloom. And it's very frustrating to me as someone who enjoys this game how much adversity this game has faced from within the FGC. Like, make up your minds on what you want. For years, we've had player bases across all games ask for better netcode, ask for better dev support, more transparency, stronger database balancing, and more objective reasoning. We get all of these things in 2XKO on a quadruple A developer, and for whatever reason, it's just getting dunked on all the time because the game wasn't necessarily finalized. It had the issues I mentioned, but I mean, come on. We should wish for success of any fighting game in this space. This is just ridiculous at this point. So no, the game is not doomed. It has a size that is easily comparable to what many live service fighting games had after their launch, if not more. And additionally, I think that the quality of Riot and the passion of the remaining team suggests that in combination with how well the game has been going lately in tournaments and just gameplay in general, the future is bright. And we really need to show that we enjoy this game in order to secure more support from Riot. That's all I wanted to say for this one. Hopefully my thoughts are relatively clear, and I'll see you in a few months whenever I upload my next video. I am the greatest Vidar in the world. Don't you ever forget it.